Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. I love presenting to you these new and improved betting odds, especially before these seasons begin. But we are now transitioning to our first defensive profile of the day with a guy from the New York Jets who I really love because he's so versatile along that defensive front. Without further ado, let's jump right into the player profile. But before we do, I do want to remind you yet again to please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link in the description, gsmc.cloud. It's a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. Without further ado, let us jump right into the player profile of Mr. Quinnen Williams. When this guy came to the New York Jets, it truly felt like a transition to the Jets really becoming serious about building their defensive identity. They knew that the offense was going to have its struggles with Zach Wilson adjusting. They signed Aaron Rodgers, got hurt. But the defense has always been a constant. And at its center, in the middle of that defensive line, one of the better interior defensive linemen in the league, sits Quinnen Williams, who, when I look at him, can align anywhere on the field. He's a big, solid presence who's not just a run plugger, who just doesn't eat blocks. He can get to the quarterback. He can tackle you for loss. And as the Jets get better around him, not just in the secondary where I would say their main strong suits lay, but by adding pieces like Hassan Reddick from Arizona, by adding Javon Kinlaw to sit as well with him in that defensive front, and then a guy like Jermaine Johnson coming along in his second year, I really like what the Jets are going to do this year. I'm really hopeful about this Jets defense, especially if the offense is competent enough as to where they don't have to be on the field for long stretches of time. And so without further ado, let's jump right into why Quinnen Williams is going to be a huge part of that. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 467.5 fantasy points. Last year, he had 131.8, 39 solo tackles, 11 TFLs, 6 sacks, and 3 passes defended. Now, in the grand scheme of things, will Quinnen Williams' production go down now that the Jets have revamped their defensive line? I actually believe so, and here's why. When I look at the pieces they added, it speaks to a more physical approach. Javon Kinlaw isn't your prototypical defensive tackle. I feel like he's more of a hybrid where you can push him out to the edge, especially if Jermaine Johnson isn't as refined or polished as you think. I think that Jermaine Johnson definitely has a future ahead of him with the Jets, but at which position is going to be determined by how they value Javon Kinlaw, especially in a 4-3 defense where you need very lengthy, versatile players in your front. And then, when you go to your linebacker group, adding Hassan Reddick from Arizona, a player who has consistently improved year after year, really diversifies how you can play your front 4, front 3, or what have you, in terms of pass rush or run plugging. And so, what I really like about for Quinnen Williams in particular is that while he's going to maintain some stats, others will go down. And you're going to have to live with that and accept that as it comes in your IDP league. But in terms of him growing as a player, I think that having the season like he did last year, which was probably his most balanced season, really goes to show that when he has the personnel around him, Quinnen Williams is going to quickly learn that you don't always have to push yourself through a certain mindset. You don't always have to be like, hey, last year is probably the most important part of our front seven. I know that our secondary was going to carry us a little bit, but that was probably the most important part of our front seven. This year, we added more guys. I really like what I see out of Kinlaw. I like what I see out of Reddick. and this Johnson kid's going to come up through the ranks. So, Quinnen Williams, when I view him for this season especially, is definitely going to pop in stats that people might not expect. For example, let's look at how the Jets might run up in running situations. Quinnen could be more of a nose hybrid. He can align over either the center or the guard or tackle. He can play kind of a hybrid 4-tech, I see in my eyes, where he can hit the gap, get in the backfield, and get even more tackles for loss than we expect. Whereas Kinlaw can combine his strength with his speed and pass rush moves and that ability, and he can be more of a pass rushing defensive tackle. Depending on what we see out of Jermaine Johnson, whether or not he's even viewed as an immediate starter, I would like to see him kind of be the athletic edge rusher who, whether he lines up on the left or right, can add that value from the edge rushing, because by adding a guy like Kinlaw, you add so much versatility and kind of the element of surprise to your defensive setup, and it really allows you to focus more on alignments. And that's what I love about this Jets defense, is how their new additions will diversify alignments. I think that Javon Kinlaw is going to move around a lot. I think Jermaine Johnson's going to be tested at different positions. Hassan Reddick can blitz as much as he pleases because that's where he makes his bread and butter. And then the big question is, well, where does that leave a guy like Quinnen Williams? Does that kind of give him the advantage of rushing up the middle and getting more production there? Does that allow him to kind of allow others to focus on rushing the passer and him more, being the assister? And when I look at Quinnen Williams and try and place him in a box, it's kind of difficult to, because I know he's built as the perfect interior defensive lineman you would always want, especially in fantasy as well, because he adds so much value in terms of the stats he dominates in. But in this new look Jets defense, where out of all the players in the system, he's the one that remains constantly comfortable with where he stays, and so will Robert Saleh when it comes to alignments. It's going to be very interesting to see how that affects what he does and how he does it, because when you play the Jets and their defense, the scouting report is going to become much more difficult to parse through, because usually you would say, okay, maybe we want to stick more short to intermediate pass routes because their secondary is the best part of this. We have to account for Quinnen Williams up front, but outside of that, I think we should be fine. This year is a bit different because you have to worry about Kinlaw, where he's going to line up. You're going to have to worry about Hassan Reddick, whether he comes up in the blitz. We're going to have to worry about if Jermaine Johnson can improve and how he fits along this line. So it's going to be a different offensive game plan for people. And how it affects Quinnen Williams is, when you're the interior defensive lineman and your job is just to penetrate into the backfield, do teams now kind of run more on a loaded box than usual? Or do teams, especially in the AFC East, who are very well equipped to do this, get a bit more quick in their passing game? When I look at teams in the division, the Bills, the Dolphins, the Patriots even, I look at teams who are willing to get the ball out fast and quick, willing to stretch the field, willing to space out different players, and that worries me with Quinnen Williams because he's not necessarily a stationary player, but I feel like where he's most comfortable is just being able to apply pressure that worries the quarterback enough. And while he still can do that, I think that now that there's more edge rushing help, the ball is going to come out a lot quicker from opposing offenses than the Jets might expect. And they definitely had the secondary personnel, like I will talk about later, to cover that. But as of right now, Quinnen Williams is the puzzle piece that is going to have to maybe take a back seat. And it's no fault of his own. I still think he has value in certain areas. I still think he's going to dominate in terms of tackles and tackles for loss. That's what every defensive tackle's bread and butter is. But when I look at how this Jets defense is going to look and how opposing offenses might attack them, I'm certainly thinking that Quinnen Williams might get a little bit underappreciated and as a result might be a bit undervalued. And don't get it twisted. When it comes to defensive tackles, you can get no better than Quinnen Williams. He's always consistently improved year after year and cemented himself on that line. But is being a constant on a defense that's ever changing around you the best? In some cases, maybe. But for Quinnen Williams, it might not be. And so, I'm really, really excited and interested and very curious as to how the Jets' alignments are going to play out. Because no matter what, Quinnen Williams will stay there. The question is, what stat and what traits are going to allow him to dominate more than others? And that's what Quinnen Williams is ultimately going to become in the system. And that should just about do it for the segment. Coming next, we transition to another sense of betting odds. After the All-Star break and the excitement surrounding that, we look into the updated World Series odd and one of the more even top fives you can see in terms of betting odds in any league in sports. We'll be right back with that after this.
Looking for your daily